When your mother works in an office, you quickly learn to read people, especially those who snap their fingers. The story isn't for youth, it's about real feelings, real mistakes, and how important it's to respect those who are easy to overlook. Everything in the video is fictional, the titles, names, addresses, but the essence is pure truth. Don't repeat other people's mistakes.
I knew I was done the second her fake acrylic nail snapped mid-air from all that finger pointing. "Hey, tech grandpa, fix the Wi-Fi," she barked, like I was some hotel concierge and not the person who architected the entire damn network. Kendra, CFO's daughter, fresh out of some 6-week MBA boot camp, didn't even look at me when she said it. She just kept staring at her glitching PowerPoint like it had personally betrayed her. I was sitting 5 feet away, configuring a system sync for our failover clusters, headphones halfway off, when she decided to treat me like I was a damn appliance. And right there, in front of investors, she said it again. I said fix it. Before we go further, I just want to say, if you've made it this far into the story and you're enjoying it, hit that subscribe button and like the video. Seriously, 97% of folks never do, and it helps the team keep digging up these wild corporate stories you won't believe are real. All right, back to the chaos. Now let me rewind for a sec and tell you what she was actually snapping at. For 8 years, I built Callenworth's entire backend from the ground up. When I started, we were running off a single consumer-grade Netgear and someone's nephew's idea of a server room, which was basically a broom closet with a fan. I changed that. I deployed a segmented network with cloud-integrated storage, built redundancy protocols, and migrated all our client archives to a hybrid system behind enterprise-grade security. I didn't just keep the lights on. I rewired the damn grid. They called me Tech Grandpa, even though I'm 48 and my posture is better than most of their ergonomic chairs. I wore it with pride. What they didn't understand is that nicknames like that are earned. You don't get a nickname in this business unless you've been the person who answers when everything else fails. Power outage? Ask Tech Grandpa. Vendor breach? Call Tech Grandpa. CEO locked out of email during a merger call? Guess who unbricked his account from a Waffle House parking lot with 1 bar of signal and a burner laptop? Yeah. Thing is, I never signed on as an employee. Callenworth brought me in through my consultancy, Nelson Frameworks, LLC. Everything I built was licensed through my firm. Every VLAN, every automated restore loop, even the scheduling software Kendra couldn't seem to navigate without calling me twice a week. The entire stack was technically my IP, outlined in a contract the CFO himself signed 7 years ago when I negotiated renewal terms during a crisis they've conveniently forgotten. But as the firm grew, they stopped seeing the wires. When tech works, it disappears. People forget there's a heartbeat beneath their dashboards. They started bringing in strategic operations hires who knew how to animate charts and suggest migrating everything to a singular cloud solution, whatever the hell that means. I smiled, nodded, let them have their meetings. But I also documented every damn change, every license key, every terminal session, every access point with a MAC filter tied to a dynamic lease. I had backups of backups, encrypted twice over and stored across 3 zones. And then came Kendra, glossy-eyed, sharp-tongued. She strutted in on her 3rd day with a soy latte and told me the firewall was aggressively inconvenient for the collaboration. Wanted to consolidate admin credentials into a shared Excel sheet so teams can move faster. I laughed, then realized she was serious. I told her no. She told me I wasn't being solution forward. I've worked with smart jerks and dumb visionaries, but there's something lethal about someone who's both arrogant and ignorant. She started emailing the CTO about how I was gatekeeping access and stalling productivity. Never mind that she once unplugged a switch to charge her phone and took down an entire conference room. The last straw was that meeting with investors. I told her, calm as a glacier, I'm in the middle of a critical sync. 5 minutes and it's done. She scoffed, crossed her arms. You're done now, she said, effective immediately. I didn't argue, didn't flinch, just saved my work. Logged out, powered down the access terminal, then I opened the system license manager and flipped the admin flag on every active contract to non-renewed. It was 1 click, 1 quiet keystroke. No theatrics. I unplugged my badge reader, zipped up my kit, and left her standing there with her broken slideshow and her stunned face like she'd just fired the janitor and somehow the elevators stopped working. 12 minutes later, the building started to feel it. And trust me, nobody knew where the wires were buried but me. She arrived like a glitch in the system. Kendra, daughter of our CFO, armed with a LinkedIn certificate, a 5-week executive fast-track boot camp, and all the entitlement that comes with never having earned a credential in your life. Her first day, she held a standing meeting called Modernization Monday and announced she'd be auditing our tech bloat. Her words. I was standing behind her, fixing a sync issue on the trading cluster when she asked the room, "Who built this disaster?" I raised my hand, calmly. "That disaster paid your dad's bonus 3 years running," I said. Kendra didn't laugh or blink. She just wrote something in her little moleskin like she was going to lead a TED talk about how to screw over a woman twice her age with triple her IQ. Within 48 hours, she tried consolidating every system credential into one Google sheet, passwords, root keys, admin tokens, all dumped into a color-coded nightmare with tabs labeled things like "Firewall, do not touch," and "Master access, be careful." I flagged it instantly, slapped a red line on it with a compliance note, and forwarded it to legal, IT security, and her father. She replied in one sentence, "Too complex, not scalable." Scalable? Honey, this isn't a startup SaaS dashboard. We're sitting on $1.3 billion in active portfolios routed through a triple redundant hybrid system that I built while you were still debating whether you wanted to major in communications or media psychology. Worse, she started showing off, walking into meetings with VPs and referring to herself as Ops Kendra, as if giving yourself a nickname is how you earn respect in a place like this. She questioned my ticketing queues, asked why I didn't use off-the-shelf solutions, even suggested moving everything to one shared Dropbox to reduce friction. She once spent 45 minutes trying to pitch me on replacing our incident tracker with a Slack channel called Hacker Tech Hiccups. When I said no, when I explained, politely by the way, that you don't replace hardened infrastructure with a free tier messaging app, she got quiet, cold, and then whispered it under her breath as she walked away from the war room. "You're not scalable." That was the moment I stopped seeing her as a nuisance and started seeing her as a risk. I went home, poured a bourbon, and pulled up my original vendor agreement. 7 years old, still ironclad. My consultancy, Nelson Frameworks, was the backbone behind their operations. Everything from Wi-Fi access to compliance archiving to the freaking smart HVAC system in the executive lounge was tied to license keys issued and maintained by me. And buried in the fine print, Section 7B, premature termination without written offboarding renders all infrastructure licenses void and non-transferable. Immediate revocation of service applies. I remember smirking when I reread it. I'd added that clause after a previous exec tried to stiff me on back pay. Legal let it slide because nobody ever expects to fire the person who built the invisible pipes. But here she was, loading the gun and aiming it straight at her own foot. She had no clue what she was messing with. No idea that one flick of her wrist, one impulsive snap of her fingers would unravel more than just her access to a slideshow. The truth is, people like her think systems are magic. They assume Wi-Fi just works, backups just happen, and dashboards never lie. But someone builds that magic. Someone maintains the dark corners of the server stack where no one else dares look. And in this company, that someone was me. And I'd just confirmed, in writing and legally binding ink, that if she tried to pull rank without following protocol, the whole thing would go dark. Not out of spite, just policy. It was the kind of Wednesday where the coffee machine hiccups, the printers start singing their death rattles, and the air smells faintly of tension and overpriced perfume. Kendra had booked the third-floor conference room to pitch some fancy new investor onboarding strategy that involved QR codes, pastel gradients, and buzzwords like frictionless synergy. She stood there in her overpriced blazer, laser pointer in hand, half a breath away from convincing people she actually understood what the hell she was talking about. Then her screen froze, not a flicker, not a spinny rainbow wheel, just flatlined. Dead. The room went still. Her nostrils flared before her mouth did. "Hey, tech grandpa," she snapped, voice shrill with panic and pride. Fix the Wi-Fi. She didn't even turn around, just snapped her fingers like I was an Alexa with a wrench. I didn't get up. I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't even look at her. I'm in the middle of a critical sync, I said, voice steady. Wait 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That's all I asked for. Not eternity. Not a vacation. 5 damn minutes. She spun on her heels, eyes wide like I'd just pissed in her matcha latte. You're done, she hissed. Effective now. The room didn't gasp. They didn't even breathe. The CFO's daughter had just fired the backbone of her infrastructure team mid-meeting. I caught the flash of horror on one of the investors' faces. He'd been through a data breach once, I could tell. PTSD from watching dashboards go dark. I stood up slowly. No slam, no speech. Just tucked my chair in like a civilized human being. Closed my terminal. Packed up my cables. But not before doing the one thing that mattered. One click. A quiet flick of the back-end license flag in my system panel. Admin. Non-renewed. Now, to the untrained eye, that doesn't mean much. But to anyone who's built layered infrastructure for a living, that's the equivalent of removing the final beam in a tower nobody realizes is balancing on toothpicks. I didn't pull the plug. I didn't sabotage anything. I just let their time run out, like they'd requested. Kendra turned back to the room, flustered, pretending she'd transitioned leadership or some corporate euphemism for torching your own foundation. I walked past her without a word. She tried to avoid eye contact, probably expecting me to beg. I never gave her the satisfaction. As I exited, I heard her fumble through a slide she couldn't load because, surprise, it pulled data in real time from a private server no longer validating her credentials. Downstairs, I handed my security badge to the receptionist. Sarah, sweet girl, always brought donuts on Thursdays. She looked at me like someone had died. Wait, are you... Apparently, yes, I said. But don't worry, you'll be the first to notice what comes next. I walked out into the sun, phone already buzzing. Not from her, from systems, alerts, errors, failures. The sync I'd paused had triggered a cascade, unintentional but poetic. Automated dependency checks failing one by one like dominoes, not destructive, just enlightening. They'd fired the operator but left the machinery running on an expiring lease. I didn't have to touch a thing. Gravity would do the rest. It started with a soft chirp from the receptionist's monitor. Then came the blinking lights on the elevator panel. A weird delay when someone tried to badge into the copy room. And then, all at once, the second-floor printers began spitting out blank sheets of paper like a ghost had hit print and walked away. 12 minutes. That's all it took for the entire system to start gasping like a beached fish. By the time the CRM refused to sync, panic had started to ripple across the floor. The junior analysts stared at their frozen dashboards like deer in a Silicon Valley headlights. Phones rang, calls dropped, calendar invites disappeared right before meetings. The investment team, who normally treated IT issues like weather events someone else should fix, finally looked up from their MacBooks and blinked. Something was wrong, and it wasn't going away. Kendra, a junior, Marcus, I think, ran toward her with an expression I'd seen once during a fire drill. We lost access to the asset archive and the automated trade queues just dumped out of sync. I think the backup servers... Relax, she cut him off, brushing imaginary lint off her lapel. It's probably just a Wi-Fi reset. I'll ping Grandpa. She sat down, opened Slack, and started typing my name. Nothing came up. She blinked, typed again, then tried to find me under recent chats. That was empty too. She clicked into the admin directory. My name? Archived. Deactivated. No forwarding contact. No recovery fallback. No escalation path. That's when it hit her. She stood up fast enough to knock her chair backward, then tried to call the CTO. No answer. Tried again. Still nothing. Because the office phones? Tied to the VoIP system I'd secured behind two-factor authentication and a private cloud firewall. And the person who managed the keys, yeah, gone. That's when the lights dimmed. Not out, but enough to notice. The HVAC dropped into manual mode. Smart blinds along the southern windows twitched like they were confused. Someone tried to badge into the executive restroom, and the red light blinked back like it was judging them. Then came the sound none of them understood, but I did. The soft Panicked murmur of adults realizing they had no backup plan and no grown-up in the room anymore. And just as Kendra's face turned from confused to terrified, the door from the stairwell swung open. It was Bill, the building manager. Ex-military, retired early, ran the property with the kind of silent efficiency I'd always appreciated. He never came upstairs unless something broke that wasn't in his jurisdiction. Today, apparently, everything was. He walked in slow, looked around. No clipboard. Just a face like someone who'd been pulled into a mess he didn't cause and now had to clean. "Which one of you," he said, voice like gravel in a garbage disposal, "just fired the person who owns the infrastructure?" Kendra opened her mouth. Bill didn't wait. He pointed to the ceiling. "Wi-Fi's out across 4 floors. Half your card readers just failed, and your guest access line was tied into the backbone running through this entire quadrant of the building." He turned his head slowly, eyes landing on her like a truck backing up over a mistake. "You fired Nelson, didn't you?" She blinked, swallowed. He wasn't being cooperative." Bill exhaled through his nose like someone trying real hard not to commit a misdemeanor. Then he pointed at her again, slower this time. "Cool. Then you're not renewing your lease." And just like that, every executive in that room realized the person they treated like a help desk was actually the reason the damn lights still turned on. The CTO, Rick, a guy who'd once bragged about coding in COBOL during college, but couldn't reset his iPhone without help, bolted into the server room like he thought he was about to pull off some kind of cinematic override. He had that look some men get when they're too proud to admit they've walked into a burning building with a squirt gun. By the time he yanked open the system dashboard, the main admin console had already locked him out. His credentials? Demoted to Tier 3, the override function? Grayed out. The cloud management portal? Redirecting to a license expiration notice with a timestamp that read, "Initiated by Nelson Frameworks LLC, 9:43 a.m. Rick clicked furiously, trying to backdoor through the legacy dashboard I'd set up 6 years ago. But that, too, was no longer accessible. You'd think someone with the title Chief Technology Officer would have remembered that the infrastructure wasn't owned by Callenworth. It was leased, configured, and registered under my consultancy from day one. I didn't work for the company. I built the company's nervous system and licensed it back to them under strict control. Hybrid stack. Split hosted. Part AWS, part on-prem, part encrypted cold backup on servers in an undisclosed off-site facility with biometric locks and a schedule only I knew. Every asset from the firewall to the VPN tunnels ran through license keys stored in escrow. And guess who held the escrow keys? Spoiler, not Rick. They brought in IT security next. 2 junior admins and a compliance guy who looked like he was already thinking about brushing up his resume. One of them tried to plug into the rack and boot from a local recovery partition. Except I'd removed that option back in 2019 after a ransomware scare. Recovery? Disabled. BIOS password? Randomized and stored in an offline vault. Meanwhile, their finance terminals couldn't access trading data. Legal panicked and pulled out the original vendor agreement. Pages flipped. Highlighters came out. Someone found Clause 7B. Rick read it aloud like a priest discovering revelations for the first time. Termination without written offboarding voids all infrastructure licenses. Support shall cease immediately. All system access reverts to the vendor pending dispute resolution or formal buyout. Kendra stood in the corner, arms folded, trying to look invisible. Her dad, the CFO, had gone full stone face. But his hand trembled when he reached for his phone again, probably hoping I'd pick up this time. I didn't. Down the hall, I heard someone yelling about badge access being completely dead. Not just deactivated, bricked. Even the service elevator had defaulted to manual override. You know how many people know how to reboot a freight elevator from command line control? 1. And they just fired her. There was a strange quiet spreading across the office, not the kind that comes from calm, but the kind that arrives when everyone realizes they've just broken something fundamental and don't yet know how to admit it. One of the legal assistants, a girl named Marissa, who always said thank you after IT requests, looked pale as she held the paper copy of the contract. Did we ever actually complete the offboarding checklist for her? Silence. No? She whispered. And that's when the panic started to really crawl under their skin. Not loud, not public, but the kind of panic that seeps behind polished glass walls and makes executives suddenly remember what non-disclosure clauses and indemnity lines actually mean. The kind that turns PowerPoint heroes into people who realize the system they thought they owned never belonged to them in the first place. They hadn't just fired their infrastructure lead, they'd fired their lifeline. And now the system wasn't broken. It was just obeying the terms. By Thursday morning, the office had the energy of a sinking yacht with no captain and too many people trying to plug bullet holes with HR memos. The investors had gone silent. Most of them had backed out of the pitch call Kendra tried to salvage using a borrowed laptop and a guest Wi-Fi network from the coffee shop next door. Nobody could reach the compliance servers. The sandbox environment had collapsed overnight. And their trading algorithm, the one I personally containerized and deployed across 3 environments, gone cold. Legal finally got desperate and escalated it to their external counsel, who immediately flagged the contract and highlighted Clause 7B in screaming red. The same clause I had spent 4 months negotiating into the vendor agreement back when I first onboarded. Any premature termination without mutual offboarding voids all infrastructure support and associated licensing. Not may void, not subject to review, voids, as in immediate, complete, non-negotiable. The counsel's email had that panicked polish only lawyers use when they realize their client just set themselves on fire and handed over the lighter fluid. They requested my cooperation, my signature, my presence, anything. But here's the part that made it delicious. They hadn't completed a single item from the offboarding protocol, not the data handover, not the credential sign out, not the license review. They hadn't revoked access. They just deleted me from Slack and walked away like that was the same thing as severance. I wasn't even mad. Honestly, it felt like watching a group project fall apart the night before finals, except the stakes were real and everyone had bet the firm's future on a girl who thought version control meant having the latest iPhone. And Kendra, she had never read the contract. Not even once. I'd watched her skim it in the hallway during her second week like it was a takeout menu she didn't recognize. She'd called it dense, then asked if she could get the TLDR from one of the interns. Now she stood in front of her father, trying to explain how some IT lady had effectively unplugged half their operations without ever touching a cable. The CFO, gray in the face, jaw locked, had called me twice already that morning. I let both ring out. No voicemail, no response. He tried email. I saw the preview. Urgent, seeking collaboration and clarification. Clarification? There was nothing unclear about what had happened. They had terminated the person who architected and maintained their critical systems without following protocol, and the system, my system, had done what it was designed to do. It revoked. It locked. It sealed. No malice, no sabotage, just compliance. HR was now panicking about insurance exposure. If client data couldn't be retrieved within a certain SLA window, Callenworth would owe thousands in service-level breach fees. Their whole boutique image, the heritage building, the premium white glove approach, the "we handle everything for you" nonsense, was cracking under the weight of a single unchecked ego and one perfectly enforceable clause. I had built the infrastructure with guardrails. They walked off the bridge anyway, and now the drop was starting to feel real. By Friday morning, the office was in full bunker mode. Someone in marketing tried to spin the outage as a scheduled infrastructure refresh in a client email blast, but misspelled scheduled and accidentally CC'd 2 major investors. The board was restless. Internal comms were a disaster. Half the team had resorted to tethering through their personal phones just to send emails, and even then, they had to guess who still had access to which domain. The company was hemorrhaging dignity, one error message at a time. That's when I sent it. A single email, 1-sentence subject line. Subject: service termination invoice, contract breach penalty, no emojis, no per my last email, no theatrics. Just a 7-page PDF attachment and a very clear message in the body. Restoration contingent upon full payment and written acknowledgement of breach. Invoice valid for 72 hours. The total came out to $185,000, and that was me being generous. It included $140,000 for premature license voiding across critical systems, $30,000 for the proprietary infrastructure buyout clause tied to my LLC's escrow protocol, and $15,000 in expedited key reissuance, assuming I'd even agree to do it. No threats. No threats were needed. Legal received it at 9:12 a.m. At 9:17, I saw the first red receipt. By 9:24, I got a read alert from the CFO's office, and by 9:35, the CEO himself, who up to this point had stayed carefully out of the mess, sent a follow-up titled, "Seeking Clarification on Terms." I didn't respond. They didn't need clarification. They needed funds. Kendra, I heard, tried to insist it was overreaching, claimed I was being punitive, that I was acting like a scorned ex-employee, except I wasn't an employee, never was. I was a vendor with enforceable contracts, time-stamped compliance trails, and legal standing to shut off access the moment protocol was violated. Rick, the CTO, reportedly tried to draft a counter-proposal. Legal shut that down before it reached me. They knew better. The last thing they wanted was to drag this into discovery and risk having their investors find out the real story behind the scheduled refresh. At 10:12 a.m., I got a call from their external legal counsel, straight to voicemail. At 11:05, I received a formal acknowledgement of breach, signed, dated, and countersigned by the CEO. Attached was a wire confirmation, full amount, no red lines. I replied exactly once. Access keys will be transmitted via secure courier within 24 hours. Please note, no future support or liability is assumed past the delivery timestamp. And that was it. No handshakes, no calls, no follow-up Zooms where people pretend they're still in control. Just one bill, one wire, and one silence that said everything. Funny how quiet people get once the cost becomes real. They asked me to come in for a discussion. That's what the email said. Not mediation, not resolution, a discussion. Like we were going to talk this through over scones and mutual understanding. I agreed, not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to watch the panic hit them up close, behind all the glass walls they'd spent years building between themselves and the consequences. The meeting was on the top floor, where the ceilings are higher and the silence more expensive. I walked in 5 minutes early. No fanfare. Just a canvas folder under my arm and the confidence of someone who'd already been paid once to be ignored. The CEO was there, not a Zoom tile, not a proxy, the actual man wearing the same $2,000 watch I'd seen him brag about in a magazine spread once. No one else spoke. Not legal, not HR, and definitely not Kendra. She wasn't invited, or she declined. I didn't ask. He motioned toward the seat across from him like we were equals. I sat. Opened my folder. Before he could deliver the first line of some scripted damage control speech, I placed 2 papers on the table. One was the final invoice, a mirror of the one I'd already sent, this time marked due upon receipt. The second was a formal statement of infrastructure detachment, a waiver of future support, assistance, or liability. No support, no maintenance, no guarantees, I said plainly. If paid today, I'll restore access. Once. He nodded. No posturing, no arguments about how this has been difficult for all of us. Just the look of a man who knew exactly how far over the edge they'd gone and how little leverage remained. The room held a kind of grief I wasn't expecting. Not sorrow for what was lost, but resignation. Like they'd finally accepted they weren't in control anymore. Maybe never had been. He excused himself briefly. When he came back, he handed me a printed wire confirmation for the full amount, cleared and time-stamped. No deductions, no questions. I slid over a sealed envelope. Inside were the restoration protocols, the access keystring, and a single-use token to decrypt the firewall access logs. Once used, it would expire. I told them that twice. I even made them sign a receipt of understanding. Everything logged, everything above board. I stood to leave. No handshake. As I turned to the door, the CEO said something I didn't expect. Was she ever going to understand what she did? I paused. No, I said without turning back. But you should have. Then I left. By the time I reached the street, their systems were crawling back online. Lights flickered to life, security doors clicked open, and the illusion of control returned just enough to get them through the next board meeting. But they'd remember this. They wouldn't remember me as tech grandpa. They'd remember me as the system they never understood and never owned. That same afternoon, while they were still testing whether their card readers would behave and praying the CRM wouldn't eat itself again, Bill, the building manager, made his final appearance. Clipboard in hand, calm as ever, he walked past reception like he owned the place. Because in a way, he kind of did. Most folks didn't realize the guy who managed the building also managed the data contracts that laced through its walls like veins. Fiber, HVAC, smart systems, even the backup generator maintenance, all under his purview. He stopped just short of the glass conference room where Kendra was pretending to reorganize the operations calendar like it mattered. Her face lit up, hopeful, like maybe he was bringing some kind of savior memo from the landlords. Instead, he just pointed at her. No emotion, just that slow, surgical gesture. "You fired the person who owned the backbone of this building's network," he said flatly, "and you expected us to keep pretending that wouldn't affect our partnership?" She stammered something, probably a rehearsed line about corrective measures or restoring operational flow. Bill didn't flinch. "Cool," he said. "Then you're not renewing your lease." That hit like a detonation no one heard coming. Their tenancy was tied to more than rent. Callenworth's entire occupancy agreement depended on consistent system uptime and shared infrastructure clauses they'd agreed to ages ago, back when they were a promising boutique firm and not a cautionary tale wrapped in glossy brochures. They'd violated every one of them the moment they terminated me and triggered the cascade. By the end of the month, I heard HR was circulating relocation notices. By end of quarter, their entire floor was vacated, conference tables left behind, chairs stacked in corners like witnesses too ashamed to speak. I walked past the building a week later and saw the real estate banner slapped across the window. Premium office space available. Fully wired, move-in ready. I almost laughed. Fully wired was technically true because I'd wired it, but not for them. Meanwhile, my phone didn't stop ringing for days. 2 of the investors who'd sat in that doomed meeting contacted me directly, each representing separate firms, both wanting infrastructure work done discreetly, quietly, the kind of contracts I liked. One of them said, "You handled that with surgical precision." I told her the truth. I just followed the contract. New clients, better money, no fragile egos with Wi-Fi entitlement issues. Kendra? I heard she ended up doing strategy advisory for a startup her dad quietly funded to keep her out of public sight. She spends a lot of time on LinkedIn now, posting quotes about resilience and growth from failure. I don't comment, I don't share, I don't need to, because the firm that once called me tech grandpa, they didn't just fire their technician, they fired their entire foundation. And foundations don't forget.